Forced to marry Comatose bride for grandfather's will, the millionaire never expected her secret. Before we uncover this shocking tale of family secrets and unexpected love, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Also drop a comment telling us which country you're watching from. We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into a story that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about love, family, and hidden truths. Alexander Blackwood stood in the marble hallway of Mercy General Hospital, his Armani suit feeling suffocating under the harsh fluorescent lights. At 32, he had built his own empire in tech development, independent of his family's vast fortune. But today, that independence was crumbling with every word his grandfather spoke. "You heard me correctly, Alexander," Harold Blackwood said, his voice carrying the authority of 8 decades and billions in assets. "Marry Victoria Sterling within the month or forfeit your entire inheritance." Alexander's hands clenched into fists. "Grandfather, this is medieval. You can't seriously expect me to—" "The girl has been in a coma for 6 months," Harold interrupted, his steel-gray eyes unwavering. "Her medical bills are destroying her family. Our marriage arrangement would solve both problems, her family's financial ruin and your need for a wife to claim your inheritance." The inheritance. $50 billion in Blackwood Industries stock, property spanning 3 continents, and control of the family empire that had been built over 4 generations. Alexander had always assumed it would be his eventually, but he never imagined such a grotesque condition attached to it. "This is insane," Alexander muttered, running his hand through his dark hair. "I don't even know this woman. And she's unconscious. How is this even legal?" Harold's weathered face remained impassive. "Her father, Richard Sterling, owes our banks $47 million. His shipping company is bankrupt, and Victoria's medical expenses are astronomical. He's desperate enough to agree to anything that keeps his daughter alive." The cold calculation in his grandfather's voice made Alexander's stomach turn. This wasn't about marriage or family. It was about business deals and leveraged desperation. "And if I refuse?" Alexander asked, though he already knew the answer. "Everything goes to your cousin Marcus," Harold replied with a slight smile. "I'm sure he'll be thrilled to finally step out of your shadow. Marcus Blackwood, spoiled, reckless, and completely incompetent." The thought of him controlling the family empire made Alexander physically ill. Marcus would destroy everything their ancestors had built within 5 years. "You have 24 hours to decide," Harold continued, straightening his platinum cufflinks. "The girl is in room 314. I suggest you meet your potential bride before making your choice." As his grandfather's footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor, Alexander stood frozen in disbelief. How had his life taken such a surreal turn? This morning he had been a successful, independent millionaire. Now he was being forced to choose between marrying a comatose stranger or watching his family's legacy crumble. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt endless. Alexander's mind raced through alternatives, legal loopholes, any way to escape this nightmare scenario. But Harold Blackwood hadn't built an empire by leaving loose ends. The will was ironclad, reviewed by the best lawyers money could buy. Room 314 appeared before him like a door to an alternate reality. Alexander hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle. Once he walked through that door, once he saw her, this would become real in a way that boardroom discussions never could. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was bathed in soft afternoon light, medical equipment humming quietly in the background. And there, in the center of it all, was Victoria Sterling. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. Whatever he had expected, it wasn't this. Victoria Sterling lay motionless in the hospital bed, but even in her unconscious state, she was breathtaking. Her auburn hair spread across the white pillow like silk, and her face held an ethereal beauty that seemed almost otherworldly. She looked peaceful, as if she were simply sleeping, waiting for someone to wake her with a kiss. Alexander found himself moving closer, drawn by something he couldn't explain. At 25, she appeared younger than her years, fragile and vulnerable in the oversized hospital gown. The steady beep of monitors provided a rhythmic soundtrack to his racing thoughts. "Hello, Victoria," he whispered, feeling foolish for talking to an unconscious woman. "I'm Alexander. I guess we might be getting married." The words felt foreign on his tongue. Marriage had never been part of his plans. He had been too focused on building his company, proving himself worthy of the Blackwood name, without relying on family connections. Relationships had been casual, temporary, nothing that interfered with his ambitions. A nurse entered the room, checking Victoria's IV and making notes on her chart. "Are you a family member?" she asked kindly. "It's complicated," Alexander replied. "Can you tell me about her condition?" The nurse glanced at Victoria with genuine care. "Car accident 6 months ago. Severe traumatic brain injury. The doctors say her brain activity is stable, but there's no way to predict when or if she'll wake up. Has she shown any signs of improvement? Some patients in similar conditions have made remarkable recoveries," the nurse said carefully. "But others, well, it's impossible to know. She's young and healthy, which works in her favor." After the nurse left, Alexander sat in the visitor's chair, studying Victoria's face. Her medical chart hung at the foot of the bed. 25 years old, unmarried, no children. Before the accident, she had been a kindergarten teacher. The irony wasn't lost on him. She had spent her life nurturing children, and now she needed someone to care for her. His phone buzzed with texts from his assistant, reminders of meetings and deadlines that suddenly seemed trivial. How could he sit in boardrooms making million-dollar decisions when this woman's entire future hung in the balance? "What would you want me to do?" he asked her quietly. "If you could hear me, what would you say about this arrangement?" The monitors continued their steady rhythm. No answers came. Alexander pulled out his phone and did something he had never done before. He Googled someone he was considering marrying. Victoria Sterling's social media profiles appeared, frozen in time 6 months ago. Photos of her classroom decorated for holidays, pictures with friends at charity events, images of her volunteering at animal shelters. She looked genuinely happy in every photo. Not the artificial happiness of social media performance, but real joy that radiated from her smile. She had been living a life of purpose and connection, everything his wealth-focused existence lacked. One photo made him pause. Victoria reading to a group of children, her face animated with storytelling enthusiasm. The caption read, "Miss Victoria makes every day magical." The kids adore her energy and creativity. Alexander set his phone down, feeling something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about inheritance or family pressure anymore. Victoria Sterling had been someone special, a woman who made the world brighter just by existing in it. And now she lay trapped in silence, dependent on machines and the kindness of others. Her father appeared in the doorway, looking haggard and desperate. Richard Sterling was clearly once a distinguished man, but months of stress and grief had taken their toll. His expensive suit hung loose on his diminished frame, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had lost everything that mattered. "You must be Alexander Blackwood," Richard said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Your grandfather explained the arrangement." Alexander stood, extending his hand. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry about your daughter's condition." "Are you?" Richard asked with bitter honesty. "Or are you just here to claim your inheritance?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Alexander realized he didn't have a simple answer. Richard Sterling closed the door behind him and moved to his daughter's bedside, his weathered hands trembling as he brushed a strand of hair from Victoria's forehead. The gesture was so tender, so filled with paternal love, that Alexander felt like an intruder witnessing something sacred. "She was supposed to get married next month," Richard said quietly, his voice breaking slightly, "to a wonderful man named David. He stayed for the first 3 months, but then, well, most people can't handle this kind of uncertainty." Alexander watched the older man's face, seeing decades of hopes and dreams crumbling in real time. "Mr. Sterling, I want you to know that I didn't ask for this arrangement. Your grandfather is saving our lives," Richard interrupted, his tone sharp with desperation. "Do you have any idea what it costs to keep someone alive in this condition? $47,000 a month for the private facility, plus specialists, experimental treatments, physical therapy for her muscles." The numbers hit Alexander like physical blows. Nearly $500,000 a year, with no guarantee of recovery, no end in sight. For a man whose shipping business had already collapsed, it was an impossible burden. "I've sold everything," Richard continued, sinking into a chair across from Alexander. "The house, the cars, my late wife's jewelry. I took loans against money I don't have, borrowed from friends who trusted me. All of it went to keeping Victoria alive." Alexander found himself studying Victoria's peaceful face while her father spoke. She had no idea that her very existence had become a financial catastrophe, that her father was sacrificing everything to maintain her fragile hold on life. The doctors at the county hospital wanted to move her to long-term care, Richard said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Basic life support, minimal intervention. They said I had to accept reality. But she's my only child, Mr. Blackwood. She's all I have left of my wife, all I have left of my family." "What does the marriage arrangement actually accomplish?" Alexander asked. "Beyond solving my inheritance issue?" Richard's laugh was hollow and bitter. "Your family's medical trust will cover all of Victoria's expenses indefinitely. The best doctors, the most advanced treatments, private nurses around the clock, and my debts. They disappear overnight. Your grandfather owns the banks that are foreclosing on everything I've ever worked for." The scope of Harold Blackwood's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just created a marriage arrangement. He had engineered a perfect trap. Victoria's family needed salvation, and Alexander needed a wife. The old man had orchestrated desperation on both sides to force compliance. "Has anyone asked what Victoria would want?" Alexander asked suddenly. Richard looked up, surprise flickering across his tired features. "What do you mean? If she could wake up right now and hear about this arrangement, what would she say? Would she want to be married to a stranger just to solve everyone else's problems?" For a long moment, Richard was silent. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Victoria always said she would rather die than be a burden on anyone. She's fiercely independent, stubborn as hell when she believes in something. If she knew what her medical care was costing." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, but Alexander understood. Victoria Sterling would be horrified to learn that her father had destroyed his life trying to save hers. "But she can't make that choice now," Richard continued. "So I have to make it for her. I have to believe that somewhere inside her mind, she would want me to do whatever it takes to keep her alive. Maybe she'll wake up tomorrow, maybe in a year, maybe never. But I can't give up on her." Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline where his own company occupied 3 floors of a glass tower. Everything he had built seemed insignificant compared to a father's desperate love for his dying daughter. "Mr. Sterling," he said slowly, "if I agree to this marriage, I want you to know that it won't be just a business arrangement. I'll make sure Victoria receives the best possible care. I'll treat her with respect and dignity. And if she wakes up?" Richard asked, hope and fear warring in his voice. Alexander turned back to face the unconscious woman who might become his wife. "Then we'll figure it out together." As he spoke the words, Alexander felt something unexpected, a sense of purpose he had never experienced in any boardroom or business deal. Victoria Sterling was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she represented something he had always been missing. The private chapel at Mercy General Hospital had never hosted a wedding quite like this one. Alexander stood at the makeshift altar in his charcoal gray suit, feeling surreal, as he waited for a bride who would arrive on a hospital gurney. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had attended dozens of society weddings, elaborate affairs with hundreds of guests and million-dollar budgets. This ceremony would have exactly 7 witnesses. Harold Blackwood sat in the front row, his satisfaction barely concealed behind a mask of solemnity. Beside him, Richard Sterling clutched a small bouquet of white roses, the only traditional wedding element in this bizarre scene. The hospital chaplain, Dr. Matthews, had initially refused to perform the ceremony until Harold's legal team presented documentation proving everything was legitimate. "This is highly unusual," Dr. Matthews had protested. "Marriage requires consent from both parties. Ms. Sterling's father has legal guardianship and medical power of attorney," Harold's lawyer had replied smoothly. "All documents are in order." Alexander's hands trembled as he adjusted his tie. In 32 years, he had never imagined his wedding day would feel like a funeral. The chapel's soft lighting couldn't disguise the clinical reality of what was happening. He was marrying a woman who might never know his name. The doors opened, and Victoria appeared on a specialized medical transport, attended by 2 nurses who had volunteered to help with this unprecedented event. They had dressed her in a simple white hospital gown that resembled a wedding dress, and someone had woven baby's breath through her auburn hair. Even unconscious, she was breathtakingly beautiful. Alexander's breath caught as they positioned her transport next to where he stood. Up close, he could see the faint freckles across her nose, the long, dark eyelashes that cast shadows on her pale cheeks. She looked peaceful, almost ethereal, like a sleeping princess from a fairy tale. "Dearly beloved," Dr. Matthews began, his voice uncertain, "we are gathered here today under unusual circumstances to join Alexander Blackwood and Victoria Sterling in matrimony." The words felt hollow in the sterile hospital environment. Alexander found himself staring at Victoria's face, wondering what she was dreaming about, if she could somehow sense what was happening. Did some part of her consciousness realize that her entire life was changing in this moment? "Alexander," the chaplain continued, "do you take Victoria to be your lawfully wedded wife in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse?" "For better or worse." Alexander almost laughed at the irony. Could it possibly get worse than marrying an unconscious woman to claim an inheritance? "Do," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. The chaplain turned to Victoria's still form. "Victoria Sterling, if you consent to this marriage, please indicate in some way." The room held its breath. Alexander found himself hoping for some sign, some flicker of awareness that would make this feel less like a violation of everything marriage was supposed to represent. Nothing happened. Victoria continued sleeping peacefully, unaware that she was becoming Mrs. Alexander Blackwood. "I'll take her silence as consent," Dr. Matthews said uncomfortably. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife." No one moved. There was no kiss, no applause, no celebration. Alexander was now married to a woman who didn't know he existed. Harold stood and approached the transport where Victoria lay. "Welcome to the family, my dear," he said with genuine warmth that surprised everyone. "You'll receive the best care money can provide." As the witnesses signed the marriage certificate, Alexander noticed something that made his heart stop. Victoria's hand, which had been lying still throughout the ceremony, had moved slightly. Her fingers were no longer flat against the white sheet. They were curved as if reaching for something. "Did anyone else see that?" Alexander asked urgently. The nurse checked Victoria's vitals quickly. "Everything looks normal. Sometimes patients have involuntary muscle movements. It doesn't necessarily indicate consciousness." But Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, somewhere in the depths of her coma, Victoria Sterling Blackwood had been aware of what was happening. As they prepared to move her back to her room, Alexander made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Alexander dismissed his driver and spent his wedding night in room 314, sitting beside his unconscious wife in a chair that would become his second home over the following weeks. He had changed from his wedding suit into casual clothes and brought a bag with essentials. He wasn't leaving Victoria alone on their first night as husband and wife. Bizarre as that concept was, "I know this isn't exactly the honeymoon you probably dreamed of," he said quietly to her sleeping form. "But I wanted you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The night nurse, Maria, had grown fond of Victoria during her months at the hospital. She approached Alexander with a mixture of curiosity and protective concern. "Mr. Blackwood, visiting hours ended at 9. "I'm her husband now," Alexander replied, the words still feeling foreign. "I'd like to stay with her tonight if that's possible." Maria studied him carefully. She had seen many visitors come and go during Victoria's stay, some genuine, some merely curious about the beautiful Comatose woman. But something in Alexander's demeanor seemed different. "She likes when people read to her," Maria said softly. "I know she can't respond, but her vital signs sometimes change when someone talks to her. It's almost like she's listening." Alexander looked at Victoria's peaceful face. "What kind of things does she like?" Her father brought some of her favorite books, poetry mostly. She was an English literature major before she became a teacher. Maria pointed to a small stack of well-worn books on the windowsill. After Maria left, Alexander examined Victoria's books. They were clearly beloved. pages soft from handling, passages underlined in faded ink, margins filled with thoughtful notes in elegant handwriting. He opened a volume of Emily Dickinson and saw an inscription on the first page. "To my darling Victoria, may you always find magic in words. Love, Mom." The personal glimpse into Victoria's life hit him unexpectedly. These weren't just random books, they were treasures. Connections to a mother who was no longer alive, and a life that had been full of love and learning. Alexander began to read aloud, his voice tentative at first, then growing stronger as he fell into the rhythm of the poetry. "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality." As he read, something remarkable happened. Victoria's breathing, which had been shallow and mechanical, seemed to deepen slightly. The change was subtle, barely noticeable, but Alexander was watching her so intently that he caught it immediately. "You can hear me, can't you?" he whispered, leaning closer to her face. "Somewhere in there, you know someone is here with you." He continued reading through the night, taking breaks only when his voice grew hoarse. With each poem, each story, Alexander felt himself connecting to the woman he had married. Through her book choices, her handwritten notes, her father's stories, he began to understand who Victoria Sterling had been before the accident. She was intelligent, compassionate, someone who found beauty in literature and meaning in helping others. Her teaching evaluations, which Richard had shared, described her as innovative, caring, the kind of educator who changed children's lives. She volunteered at homeless shelters, donated to literacy programs, spent her summers reading to kids at the public library. As dawn broke through the hospital room windows, Alexander realized that something profound had happened during their strange wedding night. He was falling in love with a woman he had never met. "I promise you something, Victoria," he said as morning light illuminated her face. "When you wake up, and I believe you will wake up, I'll make sure you have the choice your father couldn't give you. If you want to end this marriage, I'll understand. But until then, I'll be here. You won't face this alone." A soft knock interrupted his promise. Harold Blackwood entered the room, looking surprised to find his grandson still there. "Alexander, I thought you'd go home after the ceremony." "This is where I belong now," Alexander replied, not taking his eyes off Victoria. "She's my wife." Harold's expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been respect. "The inheritance papers are ready for your signature." "Congratulations, you're now one of the wealthiest men in America." But Alexander wasn't thinking about money or inheritance anymore. He was thinking about the slight change in Victoria's breathing when he read to her, the way her hand had moved during their wedding ceremony. "Grandfather," he said slowly, "what do you know about Victoria's accident?" Harold Blackwood's face went pale at Alexander's question, a reaction that immediately set off alarm bells. In all his years, Alexander had never seen his grandfather look genuinely rattled. "What do you mean?" Harold asked, his voice carefully controlled. "It was a car accident. These things happen. I've been reading the police reports," Alexander said, pulling out his laptop. "I had my security team investigate. There's something you're not telling me." Alexander had spent the early morning hours doing what he did best, gathering information. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Victoria's accident hadn't been random bad luck. She had been driving home from a meeting with Blackwood Industries lawyers, a meeting about testifying in a corporate fraud case. She was going to testify against Blackwood Industries, Alexander continued, his voice growing harder, about environmental violations at the Sterling shipping yards. Violations that could have cost us hundreds of millions in fines. Harold sat heavily in the visitor's chair, suddenly looking every one of his 78 years. "Alexander, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that my wife was run off the road by a drunk driver who mysteriously disappeared," Alexander interrupted. "A drunk driver who had ties to one of our subsidiary companies. A drunk driver who was never found despite multiple witnesses." The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of Victoria's monitors. Alexander stared at his grandfather, pieces of a horrible puzzle falling into place. "You orchestrated all of this," Alexander whispered. "The accident, the financial pressure on her father, even this marriage arrangement. You needed Victoria silenced, and when she ended up in a coma instead of dead, you found a way to control the situation. That's a very serious accusation, Harold said. But his denial lacked conviction. Alexander's phone rang. His head of security. "Sir, we found the driver. He's been living in Mexico under an assumed identity. He's willing to talk in exchange for immunity." Harold's face crumbled. After 8 decades of wielding power without consequence, he was finally cornered. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," Harold said quietly. "She was supposed to be scared off, not hurt. The driver was only meant to follow her, intimidate her a little. But he was drunk and things went wrong." Alexander felt rage building in his chest like fire. "You destroyed an innocent woman's life to protect your business interests." "Our business interests," Harold corrected sharply. "Everything I've done has been to protect this family's legacy. Victoria Sterling was going to destroy us with her testimony." "What testimony?" Alexander demanded. "What could a kindergarten teacher possibly know about our business?" Harold's laugh was bitter. "She wasn't just a kindergarten teacher, Alexander. Victoria Sterling has a master's degree in environmental science. She was consulting for her father's shipping company, documenting the illegal waste disposal we were using at the docks. She had photographs, water samples, chemical analysis reports. She could have brought down 3 decades of carefully managed operations." The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. Victoria wasn't just beautiful and kind. She was intelligent enough to uncover corporate corruption, brave enough to stand up to billionaire interests. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Victoria's eyes fluttered open. "Alexander?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from months of disuse. Are you the man who's been reading to me?" Alexander's heart stopped. She was awake. After 6 months of silence, Victoria Sterling Blackwood was conscious and looking directly at him. "Yes," he managed to say. "I'm Alexander." "I'm your husband," Victoria finished weakly. "I heard the ceremony. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I could hear everything." Her eyes found Harold across the room. "Including what you just confessed." Harold Blackwood's face went white as he realized the implications. Victoria had been conscious enough to hear him admit to orchestrating her accident. "The police have been looking for evidence for months," Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger. "No, they have a full confession from the man who ordered my attempted murder." Alexander took her hand, marveling at the warmth of her fingers, the miracle of her consciousness. "Victoria, I'm so sorry. I had no idea about any of this when I agreed to marry you." Victoria studied his face, seeing something there that made her smile weakly. "I know. I've been listening to you read to me every night for 3 weeks. I could hear the kindness in your voice, the genuine care. You married a stranger to save her life." "I married someone I was already falling in love with," Alexander replied truthfully. Harold stood abruptly. "This conversation is over. Whatever you think you heard is being recorded by the FBI." Victoria interrupted, gesturing weakly toward a device on her bedside table. "I've been conscious for a week waiting for you to visit. I knew you'd eventually reveal the truth if you felt safe enough." Alexander stared at his wife, this remarkable woman who had outmaneuvered his grandfather while pretending to be in a coma. "You've been awake this whole time?" "Not the whole time," Victoria said, squeezing his hand, "but long enough to fall in love with the man who reads me poetry every night and promises to give me choices he doesn't have to give." As FBI agents entered the room to arrest Harold Blackwood, Alexander realized that his arranged marriage to a comatose bride had become something neither of them had expected. The beginning of the greatest love story of their lives. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of love, deception, and justice. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who believes in the power of true love conquering all. Comment below and tell us, do you believe that love can truly bloom under the most impossible circumstances? Your engagement helps us bring you more amazing stories like this one.